us and sustains us through all that life brings our way. We hold up today the joys and the concerns that have been shared here, understanding that there is so much that is precious that we hold in our hearts. May we find in this community a people who can support us as we care and grow together, as we challenge one another and sustain each other through life's challenges. And as we consider today the work that is needed to create a beloved community within our community and the world, we ask for wisdom, attentiveness, and courage to do our work that needs to be done. We give thanks for all those who have helped in these 60 years to build this fellowship. This we ask in the name of all that is sacred. Amen. During the 60th year, we're looking back and we're looking forward. Most of us have heard some of the stories of our early members, such as Bernice and Albert Holt's commitment, who with others began the Clemson Child Development Center. We still have members like Cecil and Sandra and Linda who go every week to volunteer there. This is part of our heritage. And there are other members in this fellowship who have worked over the years to create change in the Clemson area. In the 60th year, we honor some of the ways our members have contributed to a more open and diverse community, and take time this morning to honor two significant ways that our members have encouraged change. This recognition offers us the opportunity to consider how we too might make a difference here where we live. We don't usually consider the ways that each of us might help enable cultural and societal change, yet each of us has the capacity to transform the world. Sometimes transformation happens on a big scale, but most often it occurs when we have the courage to act in small ways, to speak the truth in love, to challenge bigotry, or simply to offer a word of compassion, never knowing the ripples that might be set in motion. Many of us here are people who teach or work for nonprofits or raise children or create beauty. Whatever we do, we can make a difference, especially when we are awake. Life is too precious and the stakes are too high to simply walk through our lives. We must move forward with the understanding that every word and every action can affect the world for good or ill. We need to stay awake so that when the little openings for change arrive, we recognize those opportunities and can act with commitment. We might think of ourselves as the tiny roots that grow down into the rock that eventually cracks open the rock. Or we become the tiny drop of water that, when persistent and joined with others, can reshape the land. Openings and opportunities emerge when we live with intention. Transformation happens with commitment and persistence. To be awake and aware takes practice. We must develop the ability to hold a vision of what is possible. To remain awake and aware is made easier when we have role models and mentors. Today, we're blessed to consider two opportunities that emerged in the Clemson community that have enabled change to take place, and we honor the work for transformation that was possible because of opportunities that were taken and acted upon. So it's with pleasure that I welcome Sue Lasser to speak to the work that Bob Snellsire helped create in Clemson for a more diverse community. Thank you, Sue.
Reverend Terry, Cecil, members of the fellowship, thank you for inviting me to participate in this service that honors Bob Snellsire. It was my pleasure to work with him for more than 20 years, and I count him as both a dear friend and a lifelong mentor. Although we worked together for so long, Bob's career in what I'll call academic social justice began at least a decade before I came on the scene. He must already have had the reputation for serving students because the dean of the then College of Engineering singled him out as a change agent. As Bob tells it, it was about 1976 when the dean called him in for a talk. It seems that he, the dean, had been brought to notice that there weren't very many black students, and economic pressure, i.e. donors, was forcing him to address the issue. Something has to be done about this, he told Bob, because employers want to hire African Americans and we don't have any. He ordered Bob to do something about it. So Bob did. Reasoning that exposing students to Clemson during high school would attract them to consider Clemson as a college possibility, Bob designed the model for what became the Clemson Career Workshop. It's a 2-summer program that is still going strong today. Academically talented minority high school students from all over the state applied for a 2-week program in the summer after 10th grade and then returned for 3 weeks in the summer after 11th grade. Building bonds among the students over 2 years, Bob reasoned, would make them, make them more likely to apply as a group to attend college together. After only 3 years, Bob's extremely successful model was adopted and expanded university-wide. Now, in their first year, their students took many classes in a variety of subjects, but in their second year, they majored in engineering, pre-law, pre-med, or business. SAT prep and college admissions information were also a part of the curriculum. The students experienced the excitement of spending time with other academically minded students and with college-aged counselors who looked like them. A yearbook was produced every summer, and lifelong friendships were formed. More than 1,000 students have benefited from participation in the Clemson Career Workshop. And it worked, as the Dean of Engineering had directed. Significantly more African American students were being admitted to Clemson in engineering. But by the time I arrived in 1985, Bob had realized he wasn't satisfied. They get into engineering, he told me, but they flunk out, and they shouldn't flunk out. I did some research. After all, what are graduate students for? I found many articles about the experience of black students at predominantly white universities. They didn't paint a very pretty picture. Feelings of isolation, the profound dislocation of suddenly finding themselves in a totally white world, the lack of reference points experienced by anyone who is a first-generation college student. All of these barriers, and many more, were documented in the literature. I carried on my research by interviewing the Career Workshop counselors and other black Clemson students. These were Clemson University engineering juniors and seniors who were going to make it. Tellingly, they referred to themselves as survivors. They had many different backgrounds, but the common thread in all their stories was a brother or a cousin or a friend from home who was already here at Clemson and could show them the ropes when they came. Somebody was here to lend a hand. So Bob and I decided that what we needed to do was provide this person to each incoming African American engineering student. Remember, this was 1986. Mentoring wasn't a cliche. It wasn't even a buzzword. This was pretty radical stuff. Moreover, we decided that if at 18 years old you were savvy enough to understand what a mentor could do for you and self-confident enough to apply for one, you weren't the one who needed a mentor. We wanted to reach all the students, including the ones who were quietly drowning. So for our mentoring program, you wouldn't have to apply. We would find you and give you a mentor without your asking. Ooh, thank you. Together, Bob and I hashed out the details of what our program should look like. Then Bob went to the dean, a different dean by then, and told him he needed a certain sum of money to start a mentoring program. Bob was, as he would be the first to tell you, lying through his teeth. He knew perfectly well that it was going to cost at least double the amount that he named. But this was Bob in his buccaneer mode. Deans don't need to know too much, he instructed me. If you tell them what you're doing, they think they have control, and they don't. Another motto from this period was, never ask permission. And so the Programs for Educational Enrichment and Retention, PEER, was born. Now, more than 25 years later, thousands of students have been peer mentees and mentors. And currently, Clemson is 16th in the nation in number of black engineers we graduate. The third program that owes its existence directly to Bob is the Math Excellence Workshop. Based on Uri Treisman's groundbreaking research, MEW is a summer bridge program that teaches the skills of collaborative learning, that's education speak for group study, using honors-level mathematics. Treisman's method for teaching math was to have students discuss math problems amongst themselves, teaching each other rather than listening to a lecture. Again, a method that is the gold standard now, but was revolutionary when Treisman first proposed it. Bob and I agreed it sounded wonderful, but couldn't think how to implement it. And then in April of 1990, the Savannah River site, then run by the Department of Energy, discovered it had an unused pot of money that was supposed to be for minority student retention. This federal money had to be used by the start of the fiscal year, 3 months later. Who did they call? They called Bob Snellsire. Bob came to me and said, can we spend, I think was $20,000, on a minority program in 3 months? I pulled the Treisman article off my shelf. Sure, I told him. So he accepted the money. 3 months later, the first MEW seminar met with their professor. Bob and I stood outside the room, and after several minutes, I peeked in. They're talking math with each other. Come look, I told him. I can't, said Bob, I'm too nervous. More than 500 students have benefited from the Math Excellence Workshop. A few have gone on to get masters and PhDs in engineering. Over the years, comments like, I wouldn't be here without MEW, have become commonplace. And not just the knowledge and the confidence have influenced the success of our students. The friendships they form in their MEW summer lead to MEW groups on Facebook, to standing up at each other's weddings, and to serving as godparents to each other's children. There is also the South Carolina Alliance for Minority Participation. Bob was one of the initial writers of this grant to the National Science Foundation, which has brought millions of dollars into South Carolina for minority students at 12 separate institutions. These formal programs are a beautiful tribute to Bob Snellsire, and they don't even include the countless hours that Bob spent teaching all the many students who have benefited by his willingness to give his time. Bob tutored his students after hours, and often students who weren't even in his classes. He has given the gift of his time and his talent for decades to the students of Clemson University. Now, at this point, if you didn't know Bob Snellsire, I know the kind of person you'd be picturing. A saint, right? A kind, caring, gentle soul. With a soft word of encouragement for each and every one of his fellow human beings, yeah? And no. Bob has single-handedly brought the word curmudgeon to new heights. He does not suffer fools gladly. He doesn't suffer anyone gladly, especially anyone in power. Always be rude to deans was one aphorism I remember. And while he wasn't precisely rude to students, tact was never his strong suit. I vividly remember one student who came to my office right after a tutoring session. Dr. Bob told me I could be lazy or I could be stupid, but I couldn't be both, she reported. I called him. Bob, you can't say that to a student. Why not? He asked. It's true. Several weeks later, the student returned. I decided Dr. Bob was right, she informed me. I'm going to study more. As a mentor, Bob was equally pithy. I called him once years ago in deep distress from my hotel room at a conference. I had arrived at the conference after the panel at which I was supposed to present a paper had already occurred. Bob listened to my sad tale. He agreed my humiliation was total. The disgrace could never be lived down. He suggested that I was such a failure that it probably wasn't even worth coming back home. After a little more of this consolation, he asked, so, are you going to stay in your hotel room all day? No, I told him I'm not. And I went back to the conference and made the organizers let me present at a different panel, which had nothing to do with my paper, but that's okay. He provided the same kind of motivation for our then office manager, a young African-American woman who was trying to decide whether to go on for a master's degree. It was going to be really hard. After all, she had a full-time job, a husband, and 2 young children. She talked to Bob about it. He said, no, I wouldn't bother. Just sit around here with me and Sue for the rest of your life. She signed up for classes the next day. Bob got many things done at the university by threatening wrongdoers with me. You can fix this now, Bob would warn, or you can deal with Sue Lasser. Somehow I became the most feared individual in the college without ever doing anything. So if it isn't charm and tact, and it's not, what is Bob's secret for obtaining social justice in the academy? I believe it is his very simple belief in right and wrong, coupled with his unstoppable determination to achieve right. I have many more Bob stories and would love to share them and to hear yours after this service. Thank you for allowing me to share this special morning with you. Bob, I love you.
We'll work on that. Bob is a mentor for all of us. There's so many people in this community who are mentors for the next generations coming up. And one of the things that those of us who have mentors and those of us who are mentors, that we need to understand that each of us has a responsibility to take one more step along the path to building a better world. And so in that spirit, I invite us to rise in body or spirit to share hymn number 168, One More Step. Thank you, and be seated. We continue to take steps to create a better world, and we're mindful of the dangers in the world when we fail to work together. One of the tragedies today is the polarization in our society, so that meaningful dialogue across lines of opinion fail to take place. There are few places right now in our culture where open dialogue about challenging questions can happen. Yet within the Clemson community, the foundation for deep dialogue was encouraged by John and Mary Alice Mayberry, who inspired the Human Adventure Symposia in 1992. This program engaged the Clemson community in discussions about some of the most challenging issues in our society. The Human Adventure Symposia has been a model that we would wish for many communities to learn from and to be for many communities in our nation and around the world, to provide people of goodwill with the opportunity to learn from and be changed by dialogue with those of differing beliefs. So thank you, Mary Alice, for being with us this morning to share how this program began in one special project of the Human Adventure Symposia. And Mary Alice is one of my mentors. I want to be like you, Mary Alice, when I grow up.
I know a few of you around here. Hi. As you have heard, this mural, or the copy of the mural, John and I decided that we wanted to give it to someone. And why did we choose to put this copy in the UU? Because, as most of you know, John and I were convinced that if we were to influence future decisions of young people, they needed to be involved in those very issues. The Human Adventure Symposium was the result of this conviction. It was to be managed by a committee of professors in the university and as ex-temporary members, John and me. The meeting, I'm sorry, it doesn't happen to me very often. In the spring of 1998, we met at our home. This was just before we knew that John was going to be declared terminally ill. We met at our home to discuss the future of the programs. John had just read a very provocative article in the UU World on race, class, and culture. And we knew that there were rumblings in the community of dissension between the police and the blacks in both Clemson and Anderson. All very hush-hush, of course. John proposed that we begin a series of discussions about race. The use of the word diversity was just emerging, and we decided to call the series Diversity to avoid the historical negatives so deeply ingrained in the word race. And knowing that at that time, those of you who were at the university know that they didn't look kindly on anything that might sound like contention or raising the rabble. So we decided that we would meet here at the UU. And we had several meetings that were people from Anderson and Clemson who were in the community in the part that was raising concerns because we thought that we would be safer here. We also discussed initiatives for change. Also a part of the Human Adventure Symposium at that time, Dr. William Schultz, president of Amnesty International, had been asked to give a lecture at the university. We knew that Bill Schultz was the president of UUA, so we had a wonderful dinner here for him prior to his presentation. Later, an editor of one of the Chicago newspapers who was openly gay came to lecture, and we had a clandestinely advertised meeting for gays on campus, which was a very forward and kind of dangerous thing to do. But the Mary Daner, who was the chairman at that time, was very clever in focusing how they could reach the students. Then Clementina Adams returned from Mexico with a proposal to ask Senor Melchor Pareto to paint the mural. It was to be in the newly built Hendrick Center. The idea was very well received by everyone at Clemson, and with the help of many departments and gifts from John's family, Senor Pareto set up shop on the second floor of the Hendrick Center in the fall of 1999. Then began the excitement. This was the first time Senor Pareto had ever worked with a committee in designing a mural, let alone one that contained students. It was fall. We had introduced him to the university with tours of campus and included a football game from the president's box. Of course, the first figure that he started to paint on the wall was that of a football player. Students on the committee immediately raised objections. Football was too prominent and was not the only sport on campus. And besides, sports should be represented by a woman. So back to the drawing boards. This would be a symbolic painting. All of the faces would be composites so that anyone could see himself or herself in one of the figures. The Asian-like individuals could not be in a white coat. That stereotyped them, et cetera, and et cetera. Finally, Senor Pareto suggested that we leave them all naked. And thereupon the faculty came into contention. Maybe at the Brooks Center Maybe somewhere else, but not in the second floor of the Student Center. Finally, it was agreed that there would be 4 figures in regular Clemson costumes, arms linked, full of energy and enthusiasm, feet off the ground, almost dancing into what we hoped would be a happy future. The background was also would reflect what they, the background would reflect the reality that shaped who they had become and the issues that operated around them. If you look to the right, one of the members of the committee stuck her nose up like this. And when we were working on the plan, we were all into doing physical things because we wanted to show and put into figure what we wanted on this because it was hard to talk about it. So one came up, and that ended up with the gray reflecting the nebulous issues of indifference, apathy, and self-interest that mitigate against change and hold society in a state of quagmire of the status quo. To the left, this was easier. All of the aggressive, hostile, negative forces that hold people captive, deny rights to others, and the assertive postures that immobilize courageous people who want change, the postures that protest against inhumanity, the world of power and war. Overall, the colors of Clemson would reflect the place where young adults began to prosper and grow. The background of this world would be the world we hoped students of the future would be able to ameliorate so that greater equality of personhood could be achieved in the world. Now back to why the UU. What better place to leave a reflection that epitomizes the essence and values of the UU, a place that will honor and respect and advance the goal of personhood of all people. What better place for John and me to leave a piece of ourselves? Thank you for taking it. Can I just go sit down? Okay. No. Sorry, I moved.
Well, we're all grateful, Mayor Alice, not just for this painting, but for you and John and all the things that you did. And they did. They came here and excuse me, plunged into the community and followed the baseball team, if I remember.
I do.
And in fact, they even went to Hawaii to follow the team, and if I remember, rented a Mustang convertible while we were there. Kind of a measure of the enthusiasm they had for everything. So, Mary Alice, we really are grateful, and as a congregation, we would like to express that. And so, if you look in your bulletin, there is an expression of our gratitude that we'd like for all of us to read at this time. We give thanks for your vision and commitment.